API 510, Pressure Vessel Inspection Code, Chapter 3, Terms, Definitions, Acronyms, and Abbreviations. 73 definitions are brought in this chapter. Some questions might simply ask the meaning of a certain abbreviation, such as MDMT, mean design metal temperature, or equivalent term MDT, mean design temperature. Since study this section carefully to familiarize yourself with the terms of vocabulary and what they mean, because 5 to 6 questions on the exam often come from this chapter. Pay particular attention to the following definitions. Alteration. Any change in integrity operating window or original design parameter or design premises. By this we mean a change in pressure, temperature, working pressure, maximum allowable working pressure, minimum allowable design temperature, in the shape, in the design in output. That's called design parameters or design premises. Authorized inspection agency, inspection organization of insurance company, owner's inspection organization or owner subcontractor, or government inspection organization. So you got 4 entities here that could work. Could be an insurance company, could be a government, could be subcontractor, or could be owner's own inspection organization. Conditioning monitoring location. There are certain examination point, test point, measurement point are selected and by inspector. By inspector, we mean API 510 authorized pressure vessel inspector. That API wants that to be representative of corrosion behavior of the equipment. Normally, they are inspected, they are selected by inspector where the worst inspection corrosion is or damage is expected. So looking for weakest link, and also they should be accessible so that you can measure it from time to time. So the inspection location on the vessel normally identified by inspector based on the most vulnerable areas expected to be corroded or damaged. CML also helps achieving a consistent inspection commensurate with previous inspection activities. So because you need to always measure certain points because you want to compare it with in your next inspection interval to see how much corrosion happened, how much metal thinning happened, so you can differentiate and calculate the corrosion rate, say annually. The CML is defined as a circular area with a maximum diameter of 3 inch. So that could be an exam question. What's the maximum diameter of a conditioning monitoring location? Is 3 inch. So you on that 3 inch, you may take several readings and average them out. Rolled deposition welding includes temper bit welding, where the heat from the previous pass, welding pass, is used as preheat for current pass, and half beat, where half of each pass is ground and flash out. This technique are used to decrease the temperature difference between the weld and the base metal as much as possible, thereby reducing the risk of thermal stresses and the subsequent cracking. A half beat means you just grind off, flash off half of the pass, and temper beat means use the preheat of a previous pass, so you decrease the temperature difference, and then all the problems you have with the heat affected zone, the Haas region, and because of the temperature difference, you might have increased hardness on the weld or area adjacent to weld, which is called Haas, HZ, heat affected zone. Corrosion allowance, when they design an equipment, there is a design thickness, which is the minimum thickness that can withstand the pressure and temperature. And then they add some thickness to it and reserve it for corrosion allowance for the life of the vessel. So that is called corrosion allowance. The design thickness or calculated design thickness is excluding corrosion allowance. So upon calculation of vessel wall thickness based on material strength, safety factor, operating pressure and temperature, the vessel design engineer adds extra thickness to compensate for the corrosion that the vessel is expected to undergo during its life, so that by end of the vessel life, there is still enough thickness left to bear the operating pressure and temperature. So the corrosion allowance is the extra thickness of material reserved to compensate for the corrosion. For example, for most of the pressure vessel, a design life of 25 years, there is a corrosion allowance of 3 millimeter under normal operating condition. Corrosion rate is the rate the material is lost due to corrosion, erosion, or other damages over a fixed period of time. So corrosion rate is normally calculated per year and is called annual corrosion rate. Defect is a discontinuity whose size is beyond the acceptable limits and hence rejected. So a defect is also a discontinuity, but not every discontinuity is a defect until it is rejected. External inspection is inspection from outside of the vessel. It's a visual inspection of external surface of vessel in order to assess vessel's general condition and look for any crack, leak, corrosion under insulation, distortion, etc. The external inspection interval can be a maximum of 5 years according to ASME 510 code, or equal to the internal or on-stream inspection, whichever is less. For example, if the internal inspection interval is 3 years, then external inspection interval should be also 3 years or less. Fitness for service. This is assessment of damages, flaws, and corrosion in order to determine the integrity of the vessel. Reference recommended practice is 579. Heat affected zone, HAZ, HAZ. The base metal immediately next to welding is affected by the extreme heat caused by the melting of welding consumables. The significant temperature difference creates between the weld pool and the base metal creates a zone with a changed microstructure and mechanical property that is always harder than the base or parent metal. That's why you see most of the corrosion and cracks happens at the HAZ region, because it's harder and it's more vulnerable to damages, and it's more brittle. Hold point. An inspection plan includes a series of inspection and examination activities that are denoted with intervention points such as review, witness, and hold point. When an activity has a hold point, it means subsequent activities cannot be carried out until the current activity is approved by inspector. Hold point status is the most onerous intervention point and normally designed for critical activities such as pressure vessel, release of the vessel for operation, review of final documentation, and the like. Imperfection, flow, and discontinuity have the same meaning. It is accepted if its size does not exceed the allowable limit mentioned in the acceptance criteria. Indication is a response or an apparent discontinuity. It may be a false indication, such as indication observed between two mating parts. They call it inherent indication when two mating parts are designed such that during MT or PT test, which is called false or non-relevant indication. So it can be relevant or non-relevant. It may be a true indication not intended during design or manufacturing phase, which is then called a discontinuity. So a true indication is called a discontinuity. Inspection code means API 510 inspection code. Please note that API 510 is the only inspection code for the pressure vessels and hence mandatory. Other relevant API documents such as API 572, 576, 580, etc. are all recommended practices and advisory and hence not mandatory. They do not violate the code. Inspection plan. A document explaining how a pressure vessel or relief valve is inspected, repaired, or maintained. Inspector means authorized pressure vessel inspector, an individual who met the requirement and passed the API 510 examination successfully. Integrity operating window, the pressure and temperature range at which the vessel is allowed to operate. Now it could be other parameters also as should have a integrity operating window, such as fluid velocity, fluid composition, type of fluid, etc. But the most prominent and important one, and from physical sense, are pressure and temperature range. Internal inspection, the most expensive and exhaustive inspection. Inspection from inside of a vessel using visual and entity inspection techniques to find damages that cannot be found by external or on-stream inspection. Management of change. Any physical and process change to pressure vessel shall be documented and approved. It should be cascaded down to relevant personnel. If you are having any changes from your original plan, then it should be documented, and we should see that how that change affects other disciplines, and it should be cascaded down, or in other disciplines need to be informed of the change so they know what has changed, and it should be documented and approved. Okay, so this is important. It's documented because we know what we changed, so it doesn't go unnoticed, and it should be approved because if it is not approved, then it's free for all, isn't it? Manufacturer's data report contains material certificates, NDE and pressure test report, QC procedure, as-built drawing, design calculations, data sheet, and the like. Normally, the MDR table of contents is reviewed and approved by the purchaser and then filled in by the vendor or manufacturer. So what needs to go into that? Maximum allowable working pressure. The maximum pressure the vessel is allowed to operate within a specified temperature range. It is calculated based on the required or remaining thickness minus the corrosion allowance to withstand the pressure. Maximum allowable working pressure is measured by a gauge mounted at the top of the vessel, because this is the most onerous case. If you have a pressure at the top of the vessel, the pressure at the bottom of the vessel is comparatively more, because you have to add a static head at lower location to find that pressure. And for water with a specific gravity of 1 is 0.433 psi per every feet of water should be added to the pressure at the top to calculate the pressure at the bottom. That's called static head. Minimum design metal temperature or minimum allowable temperature. The lowest temperature that is allowed for a metal to operate under a certain pressure based on the thickness and its resistance to brittle fracture. This minimum allowable or MDMT is determined by the lowest ambient temperature or processing temperature, say ambient temperature in the last 10 years. So that would be the basis. Normally they add 8 degrees centigrade to that, and that would be the minimum design temperature for in case of environment. In case of process, it would be the minimum temperature of the process fluid during operation. On-stream inspection from outside the vessel using visual and NDT technique instead of internal inspection to ensure that the vessel is safe enough to operate. When we say on-stream inspection, it can substitute the internal inspection because internal inspection means you have to shut down the vessel and it costs, plus you have to do a certain measure of safety. You have to take, purge it, blind it, drain it, and then use a scaffolding if it's necessary, lighting. So all this, plus the time it takes longer time, plus all this can cost. So sometimes we can substitute internal inspection with on-stream inspection, but there are certain requirements. For example, the next inspection interval calculated is more than 10 years, and the corrosion rate is 0.005 inch annually. So it's safe. And also provided that the on-stream inspection would give more or less the same information to us than compared to an internal inspection. So there are several clauses and terms and conditions before you can substitute on-stream inspection with internal inspection. Post-well heat treatment can be done partially on a weld only or on full vessel to relieve thermal stresses induced as a result of welding. Post-well heat treatment reduces hardness and stabilizes metal chemistry. But the most important part of object of post-well heat treatment is to reduce or to relieve thermal stresses. Pressure test. After an alteration or major repair, the vessel undergoes a pressure test to ensure that it still complies with the construction code. It is a validation of design or repair. It can be a hydro using any non-combustible, non-corrosive liquid below its boiling point. Pneumatic, normally with an inert gas such as nitrogen, or a combination called a squeeze test, 50% liquid, 50% gas. For hydro test, it should be 1.3 times of maximum allowable working pressure for post 1999 built vessel, or 1.5 times of MAWP for pre-1999 built vessels. This is because of increased quality of manufacturing of the plates and vessels. So the factor 1.5 has been reduced to 1.3. For pneumatic test, is 1.1 times of maximum allowable working pressure. Pressure vessel, PV. Any container that operate at 15 psi or more of the pressure, it includes pressure vessel itself, heat exchanger, air cooler, column, tower, unfired boiler, and steam generator as an example. Pressure vessel engineer, an individual or a team. So it can be one person, it could be a team. It's still called a pressure vessel engineer by API. Approved by owner user. So on API say it should be approved by owner user because owner user is ultimately responsible for operation, maintenance, repair, and certification of the vessel. So it doesn't have any other requirement, doesn't have to pass a test like an API inspector. The only requirement that is that it should be approved by owner, and normally owner employs them or subcontract them, so they are implied that they are approved by owner. The pressure vessel engineer should be knowledgeable and experienced enough to evaluate the mechanical and material properties that affect the integrity and reliability of pressure vessel. So should have knowledge and experience for mechanical and material properties that affect the integrity and reliability of pressure vessel. Procedure. Procedure is a document describing the activities, how they are done, and their sequence, the methods and equipment used, and the qualification of relevant personnel. Procedures may either include the acceptance criteria or refer it to a code or a specification. most of the procedure, they refer to a code specification because if the code or has changed or is revised, still the procedure is valid. Or when the sensitivity of acceptance criteria has increased according to the tables in a code, still it's valid. So they don't need to revise the procedure every time. Quality assurance, designing a system, procedure, resources, infrastructure, control points in order to assure achievement of the required quality consistently. So you design a system that and provide some checkpoints there to do what? To ensure that or to demonstrate that you are having consistently the required quality. They wouldn't say better quality, they say required quality. Quality control, the execution of actual control activities designed by QA in order to validate and demonstrate conformance to the required quality. So in a simple term, they say QA designs, tries to elements to find the NCR non-conformity. QC actually detects the NCR or non-conformity. Repair, any restoration to return the vessel to its original design condition. So here the golden board is to restore, to make it safe to operate without changing its original design condition. So without changing its original design condition. If you change the original design conditions or the integrity operating window, then it is alteration. Repair can be major or minor. Alteration always would follow the hydro test to validate the overall work, to validate the design. Repair does not necessarily need to be hydro tested unless the inspector feel like the hydro test need to be done after the repair. And if you're doing a hydro test as an API inspector, you're recommending you need to consult with pressure vessel engineer. Repair organization can be owner, user, or his approved subcontractor, holder of a valid ASME certificate like RSTA, or for repair for pressure vessel, and VR for repair of the relief valve, or another recognized code of construction certificate or a government organization. Required thickness, the minimum wall thickness that the vessel, excluding corrosion alloys, that can withstand the desired operating pressure and temperature. So required thickness is the design thickness. Re-rating any change, increase or decrease in operating pressure and temperature. For example, the thickness you have observed is less than the design thickness plus corrosion allowance till next inspection interval, then you take off some from the design thickness by decreasing the pressure. So if you decrease the pressure, you need lesser thickness. So use that thickness for corrosion allowance so that the vessel can operate safely till the next inspection interval, but as a result, you have to decrease the pressure. Re-rating can be an upgrade or a downgrade. If it's a downgrade, they call it derating. Risk-based inspection, planning the inspection activities, type, frequency, location, based on risk assessment of failure, probability of failure, POF, and consequence of failure, COF. RBI aims to achieve the most effective inspection and maintenance plan. So practically, the equipment are screened first to see which equipment are more critical than the others. And also with consultation with corrosion specialists, we'll find out what is the expected damage mechanism. Also looking at the previous examination reports, see that it was effective enough to capture and size the indications and the discontinuities. If not, then we would change the NDE methods to better detect and capture those expected damage mechanism and failure modes. And by diverting the inspection efforts to more critical items, practically, we are not only making the equipment safer, but also saving some cost by reducing the inspection activities on items whose would not fail, or even if they fail, the consequence of failure is not important, so the overall risk is lower. And so we're concentrating on high-risk items. And risk, we mean probability of failure multiplied by a consequence of failure. Temper embrittlement is reduction in toughness due to long-term exposure of material to high temperature of 650 to 1100 degree Fahrenheit. And normally 2.25 chrome 1 mole is susceptible. Transition temperature. The temperature when the fracture mode of the material changes from ductile to brittle. That's why they call it ductile to brittle transition temperature. At certain temperature, the material behavior under load changes from ductile to brittle. And that especially happens for low alloy steel and the thick material, a coarse grained material. Even at ambient temperature for a hydro test, the equipment or the pressure vessel fails many times. So because it was high load and there was ambient temperature, even can be a transition temperature for thick low alloy steel or carbon steel material. And you also need to look at these acronyms and abbreviation: eddy current, gas metal arc welding, gas tungsten arc welding, magnetic particle test, non-destructive examination, positive material identification, penetrant test, post-well heat treatment, risk-based inspection, radiography, shielded metal arc welding, welding procedure specification, and procedure qualification record. This is PQR is supporting document for WPS. It validates WPS. We have talked about this on module 4 and 5. Thank you.